This is a full story. Kitten wishes you all a happy and enjoyable story. After my wife cheated, our marriage lasted another 6 years. During that time, we even had a daughter. Just when everyone thought we were heading towards a perfect and stable life, I filed for divorce. She was stunned. Aren't we doing just fine? Fine? Where did you get that idea? I pulled out a list of our assets. In these 6 years, I've doubled our family assets to $60 billion. After the divorce, you can choose between splitting the shares or cashing them out. Over these years, I did consider truly letting go, especially after our daughter, Alice, was born. But the betrayal 6 years ago was too shocking to forget. Hailey had a drunken fling with a male secretary of one of our partners, only to be blackmailed and exposed by him afterward. The company's stock plummeted, evaporating $2 billion overnight. Within a week, I was back to being her supportive husband in public, attending events and posting on social media to help her weather the storm. Some called me generous and visionary, while others mocked me as spineless, swallowing my pride. I just smiled and never responded. When the chaos subsided, Hailey seemed genuinely repentant, throwing herself wholeheartedly back into the family. But I had already seen through her lies and affection, never to indulge again. A year ago, her college crush, Tony, returned to the country after a divorce, bringing along his 6-year-old daughter. Her heart strayed again. She started living a double life with Tony. Alice barely saw her mother even once a week. Hailey had plenty of time. She was a woman with an extraordinary talent for investment. By the time she was 30, she had amassed enough wealth to retire. At her peak, she stepped down from her last board position, becoming a highly independent investor. I could only tell Alice, "Mommy is very busy." Alice nodded innocently. Hailey was indeed busy. Busy accompanying Tony to view houses, buy properties, and find a school for his 6-year-old daughter. Worried the girl might face difficulties, she even donated tens of millions to build a library for the school. She sent her personal lawyer to help Tony fight for his share of marital assets. With Hailey's support, the once struggling Tony lived a high-profile, enviable life. Things are different now. Hailey no longer fears that her scandals might cause stock market turmoil. She's enjoying the most willful and carefree time of her successful life. For couples like us, with hundreds of billions in assets, divorce is not a word we utter lightly. So Hailey paused for a moment. "Are you jealous of Tony?" She raised an eyebrow, looking genuinely surprised, as if I was being unreasonable. "He's going through a tough time, and I have the means to help him. It's rare to have a connection from our student days. We're not short on money. Rocky, can't you be more magnanimous?" "The love letter in the safe," I interrupted. Over the years, Hailey has been both my wife and my mentor, always critiquing me from a position of superiority. If I didn't cut her off quickly, she would surely berate me under the guise of college alumni loyalty. "You opened my safe?" she asked, startled. I calmly reminded her. "On the day of Alice's full moon celebration, you asked me to retrieve the seal from the box. It was also then that Hailey contributed $50 million from her premarital assets to our family fund, becoming my first pot of gold to enter the investment world." She seemed to recall, looking a bit flustered. "That was just a youthful thing. If I really wanted something with Tony, would I be so blatant about it?" She grew more confident as she spoke. "Nothing happened back then, and now we even have a child. It's even more impossible now. Stop making trouble for no reason." Whenever we had disagreements, Hailey always adopted this dismissive and superior tone. Today, I no longer wish to endure it. "Hailey, you don't need to explain anything to me. But think about how to explain it to Alice." Her face changed. "What did you tell her?" she asked warily. I laughed. "Do I need to say anything? In the past year, Alice had pneumonia once, the flu 3 times, was injured at school, and bullied for 6 months. As her mother, have you ever shown up even once?" Hailey was stunned, a flicker of guilt crossing her face. After a long pause, she awkwardly said, "Alice's matters have always been handled by you. If something was serious, you should have told me." "Yes, that's how it's been all these years." I looked at her. "Alice and I never complained. But do you even know that Alice transferred to Chingting 6 months ago?" Hailey was speechless, staying silent for a long time. I sneered. "Alice always believed you were busy, but she saw with her own eyes how you helped that little girl, Tao Tao." She overheard Tao Tao proudly telling her teachers and classmates that her mother is Hailey, rich enough to buy half the city, and that the library was donated by her family. Alice argued with Tao Tao, but no one believed she was actually your daughter. After all, you've never picked her up from school, yet you donated a library for Tao Tao. The situation ended with Alice being mentally bullied and isolated. Hearing this, Hailey was deeply hurt, but she's never one for self-reflection. Instead, she vented her frustration on me. Rocky, Alice couldn't explain it, but couldn't you? Why didn't you tell them the truth? You specifically instructed not to list your name on school forms, so Alice wouldn't grow up spoiled. As a result, Alice had never benefited from having you as her mother. She was speechless, scratching her head in frustration. Then you should have told me directly. Why didn't you tell me about Alice transferring schools? Didn't I? I told you Alice was advancing to Chingting Primary. I wanted her to adjust early by joining the preschool class. You simply replied, okay, and hung up the phone. I paused. Later, I found out through the news. That day, Tao Tao had been taken by strangers, and you stormed into Serena's house with Tony to confront her. Hailey glared at me, still unrepentant. Rocky, you're just trying to embarrass me in front of Alice. I was beyond disappointed. Yes, I should have taken our marriage certificate and Alice's birth certificate straight to the principal and held an assembly, declaring that Alice is indeed your daughter. That day's negotiation with Hailey didn't end well, but it succeeded in making her feel guilty and uneasy. I had all the advantages. It was time to formally put the divorce on the agenda. Feelings don't withstand the test of time, nor are they meant to be exploited repeatedly. Guilt should be used where it cuts the deepest. So, I left Alice behind, moved out, and stopped questioning or entangling with her. Hailey didn't try to stop me. She thought I was simply venting after being the primary caregiver for so long. The nanny told me she canceled all her social engagements, fully devoting herself to Alice, determined to make up for years of neglect. Before bed, Alice called me quietly. Dad, that arrogant Tao Tao apologized to me today, crying. I accepted it. I nodded and listened. The little one was quite talkative. Tao Tao's dad is handsome. He told me to call him Uncle. And do you like him? Alice thought for a moment. He smiles a bit like you, Dad, but I still don't quite like him. Then don't like him. You don't have to force yourself. Alice will come to know someday. She has that privilege. Once the property division documents were ready, I invited Peter out for a drink. Rocky, did you make a move? Tony hasn't been bossing me around lately. Looks like he's busy trying to please your Hailey. Peter was Hailey's personal lawyer, an expert in divorce cases, and had been working for Tony all year. Back in college, Peter and I were close buddies, sharing bunk beds in the dorm, but not many people knew about that now. When I told him about my divorce, he was so shocked that he dropped his coffee spoon. Are you serious? 6 years ago, when you had no ties and no child, you didn't divorce. Now Alice is 5, and you want to? I lit a cigarette, smirking with my head down. What would I have gained if I had divorced back then? Peter had witnessed my struggles at the time. That male secretary, aiming for a promotion, sent me photos of him and Hailey being intimate. I lost focus while driving and ended up crashing into a construction site ditch. A steel rod pierced my chest. A week after my chest surgery, everyone urged me to get a divorce. I was a top graduate from an elite university, a famous Harvard scholar athlete, with an impressive and enviable career. Hailey, at the time, was just starting to make a name for herself in finance. She came from a small town with no connections and wasn't taken seriously in the industry. Divorcing her would only broaden my future. Even my mom wasn't satisfied with her. Other than her sincere desire to marry you, she's no match for your ex-girlfriend. I brushed it off. Hailey was the woman I chose. Once the decision was made, there was no turning back. I believed in my own judgment. I also wouldn't let myself end on such a bleak note. From the moment I helped her stabilize the stock market and forgave her betrayal, she was no longer my wife, but my business partner. 5 million? 10 million? That would depend on her conscience. Investors are always shrewd, always on guard. Hailey's prenuptial agreement was airtight. Peter, however, was taken aback. That's not enough? Of course not. With Hailey's capabilities, that's nothing. Peter sighed. True. Over the years, her sharpness has been terrifying. Her wealth is beyond your imagination. He shrugged helplessly. Sorry, I can't disclose the exact numbers. Anyway, let me advise you, don't divorce. Don't let this wealth fall into the hands of outsiders. You endured it 6 years ago. Why bother now? I just shook my head and smiled faintly. Selling low and starting over, that's bitter. Cashing out at the peak, leaving with a fortune. If that's called bitter, then I'm just being modest about my gains. At the end of our conversation, Peter looked through my investment reports, an asset situation over the years. He gasped, 600 billion. My God, that's insane. But what about Alice? If you'd planned this all along, you shouldn't have had her. I smiled faintly. In my life, there are no accidents. Alice was no exception. Otherwise, why would Hailey trust me so much? With Hailey's sharpness, without Alice, she might appreciate my generosity and support, but she wouldn't have treated me as one one of her own. I didn't just need her money. I needed her investment acumen. What relationship could be more binding than blood? Peter was speechless. Isn't that unfair to Alice? How could it be? She's my only child, and Hailey's too. She'll receive all our love. Peter was exasperated. What do you mean, Hailey's too? When Alice was 3, Hailey got sterilized, I replied. That was Hailey's way of showing her determination to return to the family back then. I won't deny it. Hailey and I did share some sweet and loving days, especially before her betrayal. Several times, looking at Alice's adorable face, I asked myself if I should let it all go and simply live a good life, but I could never truly let it go. I asked Peter, when she chose to sleep with that secretary, with her intelligence, do you think she didn't weigh whether it was worth betraying me? Peter gave me a complicated look, his lips moving but saying nothing. Of course, she had weighed it, and that calculation will never deserve my forgiveness. In the end, Peter still took on my divorce case. Now that things were set in motion, it was time to meet Tony. Late at night, I made a call. It rang until the last moment before being picked up. Bro, wanna meet? I said. Rocky, I'm sorry about Alice. I didn't expect Tao to form cliques at school over the library donation issue. The way I called him brother was dripping with sarcasm. He obviously noticed but pretended not to and tried to chat with me casually. It seems our family has truly fallen from grace. Letting Alice call him uncle? Does he deserve it? Apologies aren't necessary. Spending $10 million to show off might be your way, but Alice and I won't take it to heart, I said indifferently. Do you have to speak to me in such a superior tone? After all, I am your brother, he said hypocritically. Believe it or not, there's nothing improper between Hailey and me. I responded with a cold laugh. I know you're still upset about that blind date with your ex-girlfriend Serena 6 years ago, but that was arranged by the family. I didn't marry her in the end, did I? Tony abruptly shifted the topic. So now, 6 years later, you want to steal another woman from me? Thank you for your high regard for my taste, I sneered. Rocky, don't be like this. I know being an illegitimate child cost you Serena, but I've already convinced mom and dad. If you're willing, you can acknowledge your roots at any time. Acknowledge my roots? Our family must be dreaming. It seems Mr. Rocky has truly inherited his parents' ways, being both fake and shameless enough to play the homewrecker. It's absolutely disgusting. My words grew sharper. No one in Highshire knows the truth. Before marrying my mom, Sam had been with BAME. To secure an easier life, he abandoned his engagement to become our family's live-in son-in-law. After gaining a firm foothold, he tricked my mom into having me. She, in her naivety, loved him her entire life without marrying him, willingly being his secret lover. But deep down, she wasn't content, feeling the world owed her. She lived her life in a constant state of madness and regret. This shameful origin of mine has always been something I kept hidden. In truth, I had long forgotten it, but Tony deliberately dredged it up to provoke me. Tony fell silent over the call. Just as I was about to hang up with a cold laugh, a familiar voice suddenly interrupted. Rocky, you've gone too far? Hailey, I exclaimed in shock. Past midnight, she was actually by Tony's side? What about Alice? I have no intention of interfering in your family matters, but you shouldn't misunderstand Tony and your father like this. You're a father yourself. How can you find parental good intentions so revolting? Hailey said disapprovingly. Barely suppressing my anger, I asked, and what position are you in to question me? As a mother, and even more so, as your wife, she retorted. I snapped. As a wife, eavesdropping on a phone call between your husband and another man, then siding with him, is that your role? Rocky, and as a mother, do you believe all parents are virtuous and kind? That no parent can do wrong? Enough. As a husband, as a father, I may not be perfect, but I'm 100 times better than that bastard Sam. Do you think I, a product of this cursed union, don't even have the right to resent? How dare you demand my forgiveness? And who gave you the right to mediate? I knew Tony was deliberately stirring trouble, but I still found myself arguing heatedly with Hailey over the phone. We quarreled, starting with your family, then moving to Serena, and finally back to my ex, Serena. Hailey stubbornly believed that my suggestion of divorce stemmed from unresolved issues with my birth family, that I still had lingering feelings for Serena. She claimed she wanted me to reconcile with our family for my own good. Hailey, I never knew when you became so presumptuous. I shouted, my voice filled with humiliation. choking with emotion and undeniably frantic. Not even when I was cornered by my male secretary did I lose control like this. Hailey finally sensed something was wrong with me. Hurriedly, she said, "I'll talk to you when I get back." My response was to hurl the phone into the night sky, shattering it into pieces that scattered across the ground. Standing there in the night breeze, trembling slightly from the storm within me, I suddenly felt a strange, eerie calm wash over me. At that moment, a thought surfaced. Fine, if Hailey won't agree to a divorce, this situation might just be the breakthrough I need. I quickly drove home to find Alice. After putting Alice to sleep, Tony's words continued to haunt me, leading me to dream about the events 6 years ago. Back then, I had just graduated from Harvard, with my good looks and stellar academic achievements making me a magnet for job offers. Just as I was about to accept an offer from the S Corporation, my mom stormed into my apartment, furious. "Isn't Serena your girlfriend? Then why did your father say Tony is dating her? Listen to me. Don't let that be ********************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************* only waiting for our families to meet before making it official. Anyone would be fine, but why Tony? Why must their mother and son always go against us? My mom, tearful and enraged, started recounting old grievances again, cursing Sam for ruining her life. Her haggard, resentful figure made me frown, and yet I was also grateful to her. A few days later, when Serena and I were on a date, her mother, accompanied by a few ladies, happened to see us. After sizing me up, her mother remarked with a sneer, "I've heard about Mr. Rocky before. My daughter Microlon mentioned how hardworking you are, but a man of unknown parentage." Mom, stop. Serena cut her off, shielding me. When we were alone, she apologized profusely and promised to resolve the situation. I looked at her quietly for a moment and shook my head. In those 2 years, I had come to understand Serena quite well. She was cultured, kind, and unpretentious despite her noble background. But because of that background and her innate pride, she was destined for bigger, better things. Deep down, I knew she was also aloof and reserved. She could have a pleasant conversation with you one moment, only to forget your name the next. After 2 years, I still lacked a sense of security in our relationship. A part of me was unwilling to let go, yet images of my mom, Sam, and Bame flashed through my mind. I realized I was doomed to become a sacrificial lamb for a marriage of convenience, and I wouldn't gamble on that. I drew strength from my mother's madness and self-pity. Watching someone else lose their composure was always preferable to experiencing it myself. Resolving myself, I distanced myself and politely bid her farewell. "Thank you for your 2 years of company and support, Serena. That's enough." She looked at me, stunned, a complicated expression in her eyes. "You don't trust me, Rocky?" she asked softly. I shook my head. "Miss Serena, let's part on good terms." Turning my back on her, I left, ending our relationship gracefully and decisively. When my mom found out about the breakup, she stormed into my apartment, smashing everything to pieces, hurling insults at me. "I thought I could rely on you to turn things around for me. You're worthless, nothing but a pretty face. What's the point of all your academic success without a good family background?" After venting, she grabbed my collar, her eyes gleaming with a strange light. "Son, even if you can't marry Serena, there's no need to break up. Women like her won't stay loyal to just one man. Enough, get out," I roared, pointing at the door. How could such a mother exist? After that day, I cut off all contact with her, only relenting a year later when she shamelessly showed up at my wedding with Hailey. "How does she compare to Serena?" she muttered disapprovingly. I stared at her coldly. "Do you want me to throw you out again?" Morning came, and I found Hailey sitting in the living room, her expression haggard, as if she had been awake all night. After dropping Alice off at school, I returned home directly. This time, I pulled out the divorce agreement. "Let's get a divorce," I said. She froze, her eyes reddening with bloodshot veins. "Rocky, stop joking. Once is enough if you're serious about divorce." Her voice softened. "We've been living so well together, haven't we?" I looked at her coldly. "Living well? My apologies if I gave you that illusion." "What do you mean?" Her face paled instantly. "That issue with the assistant, I already explained. I was set up. If it's about Tony, there's even less reason. You saw it last night. I helped him because I knew he was your brother." I flung the divorce papers at her self-righteous face. "You don't know. Otherwise, you wouldn't spout such nonsense." "Hailey, what are you trying to do? Dig up my dirty past to justify your betrayal with Tony?" The sharp edges of the papers left bloody scratches on her face, but she seemed oblivious to the pain, staring at me. Her patience was maddening. "Rocky, the previous generation's issues have nothing to do with you. Reconciling with your family will benefit you. I know you're sensitive about your lineage because of Serena. Years of self-control crumbled in an instant. It took took all my strength to rein in my emotions. So, is this what Tony told you? Or is it just your assumption? Explain it to me clearly. What does my past, or Serena, have to do with me wanting a divorce? Tears welled in my eyes as I spoke. Each word weighted with force. You promised me, Hailey. You said you wouldn't betray me again. Yet now, not only have you hurt me, but you've hurt Alice too. And you stand there with that savior's face, expecting me to be grateful to you? Did she not understand that I've spent my entire life trying to sever ties with our family? When my mother would rage and torment me, I wished nothing more than for their whole family to die. What gave her the right to step in lightly, claiming to help me reunite with them, as if fulfilling my wishes? Hailey's gaze grew confused, tinged with helplessness. Rocky, if you don't want this, then I silently bent down to pick up the scattered papers. By the time I had gathered them all, I had regained my composure. There's no need anymore. Just sign it. Do you remember the promise you made to me 6 years ago, when I was on the brink of death? I threw my last trump card, staring into her eyes, forcing her to recall that day. I said, Hailey, if one day I find I still cannot let go, please don't stop me. Let me go. She had knelt by my hospital bed back then, gripping my hand, consumed with regret. Her tears flowed into my palm. Rocky, I won't make the same mistake again. I'll live a good life with you, she promised repeatedly. The doctor had urged her to let me into the operating room, saying my blood loss was critical. I was pale as a ghost, yet I stubbornly held her gaze, demanding her answer. Fine, I promise. If you truly want freedom, she finally said, and I blacked out from the pain. As if remembering, Hailey threw herself into my arms, pleading, Rocky, don't do this. I'll change everything, okay? I refused, silently. After a few seconds of standoff, the weakness in her eyes faded, replaced with resolve. Rocky, must we come to this? I knew Hailey could bow her head to me, but her pride would never allow her to beg endlessly. Yes, I replied. She let out a cold laugh, a threat lacing her tone. Don't think I'll let you go so easily. You may end up with nothing. I met her gaze evenly, my voice calm. Yes. A flicker of disbelief crossed her face, followed by anger. I'll draft a new agreement. Alice will stay with me. As for the rest, don't worry. I'll make sure it's a deal you'll accept. Thank you for your generosity, Miss Hailey. After the negotiation ended, Peter rushed over. Seeing my exhausted appearance, he asked in alarm, what happened? An argument? A fight? How'd it go? I rubbed my bloodshot eyes. It's done. Let's go. I climbed into the car calmly. Peter didn't understand. To divorce a sharp and calculating woman like Hailey, emotional outbursts were foolish. Rational negotiations were also bound to fail. I was quite pleased with how I had handled today. I won't have to run errands for Tony anymore, will I? Peter scratched his chin. A faint smile touched my lips. No need. Soon enough, he'll have his own problems to deal with. During the time I waited for Hailey to send over the divorce agreement, I took care of two things. First, I brought my legal team to Chingting to establish an anti-bullying relief fund in Alice's name. The first $10 million was funded entirely by me personally. After the school publicized it, many parents expressed their support and joined the initiative. On the day of the fund's inauguration, Hailey also attended the event. The principal thanked us as a couple for our contributions to the school in front of all the students and faculty. He also invited Alice to speak as the student representative. On stage, she was confident and poised, delivering a remarkable speech that drew rounds of enthusiastic applause. Both Hailey and I couldn't help but feel proud of her. Second, I had a meeting with Tony. That day, my mother somehow learned about my impending divorce with Hailey and started causing trouble again. I grabbed her wrist to stop her from smashing things. I'm going to the R family to beat a drowning dog. You coming with me? Her eyes lit up with joy. Yes. She was enamored with Hailey's wealth and status, but her lifelong wish was still to outshine Bame. Narrow-minded and obsessed with love. Luckily, I'm nothing like her. In the car, she was as gleeful as a child, hurling insults at the R family without restraint, then turning to scold me, predicting I'd regret the divorce and more. As my assistant helped her out of the car, he vented his frustration to me. Mr. Rocky, you're incredibly patient. Even though she's your mother, you tolerate her far too much. What more can I ask of her? I replied. Growing up, she never let me go hungry or poorly clothed. She didn't hit me, nor did she remarry and let me live under someone else's roof. Even after I became an adult, she's never caused trouble for me outside the home. What's more, she gave me a sharp mind and good looks. I should be grateful to her and tolerant of her. Tony currently lived in a small villa on the Bund, in the most expensive area of High City. Unfortunately, he was only staying there temporarily. The security guard stopped me at the gate. I pulled out my nearly expired marriage certificate and was allowed in. in. Just as I was about to press the doorbell, I heard a commotion inside. "You're bad, Dad. You said Alice's mom would soon be my mom. Now my classmates are laughing at me, and even the teacher doesn't like me anymore. I don't want to go to school anymore." The sound of a little girl, around 6 or 7, crying loudly filled the air. My mother banged excitedly on the door, shouting about karma. In the living room, I sat down. The girl, Tao Tao, stared at me, her face red from crying. "You're Alice's dad? Who let you into my house? Get out." I locked eyes with her. "I'm afraid I can't do that. Not only is Hailey not your mom, but this house isn't yours either. Didn't your dad tell you?" Her sobs faltered. She looked at her father in disbelief. Tony quickly instructed the nanny to take the girl away. "Rocky, Tao Tao is just a child. Why pick on a little girl?" Though his tone carried mild reproach, he still made an effort to appear dignified, putting on the airs of a second-generation elite. "A little girl who forms cliques to bully her younger classmates? We should change our perspective. Children aren't just young. They can be mean." His face stiffened. "I know you're doing well for yourself, but you don't need to come here just to mock me. If my mockery stings, that's your own foolishness. Rocky, I know you hate me, but I haven't wronged you. We share the same blood, after all." Ignoring his words, I continued, smiling faintly. "Do you know why I say you're foolish? Hailey spent 3 months showing you houses, but you just had to get greedy and choose this one. Now, you don't even have ownership of it. With any other house, Hailey probably wouldn't have hesitated to gift it to him. The R family, once an established name, had fallen into decline. First, Bay married the incompetent Sam, who squandered nearly all of the family's wealth in just 10 years, leaving only a hollow reputation behind. They had hoped to save themselves through a marriage alliance, but Serena had no interest in Tony. Tony, unwilling to give up, coveted Serena's deeply rooted family connections and married her cousin instead. After Serena rose to power, she ousted all incompetent relatives from the family's core, including Tony's idol wife. Post-divorce, Tony managed to latch onto Hailey, thanks to his tenuous blood connection to me, using deceit and manipulation. When he returned to the country, I had already thoroughly investigated his background, yet Tony naively believed he could stir up trouble in front of me. My mother rolled her eyes. "I've had enough. Why waste time talking to him? Just kick them out." Seeing I wasn't falling for his act, Tony's expression darkened. At the same time, I noticed his hand reluctantly pull away from his phone screen. "This house was Hailey's promise to me," he said. "She told me I could live here as long as I wanted. If you kick me out, where does that leave her dignity? Rocky, I'm trying to prevent conflict between you two." Suddenly, my mother darted forward, snatching his phone away. "Huh, were you planning to secretly call my daughter-in-law? How sly of you." She turned to me, thrilled. "Son, forget all this nonsense. Just call a moving company, get the media here, and let the whole city see them crying on the streets." Tony's face turned ghostly pale. "You crazy woman." Without Hailey backing him, he was nothing but a nobody. "I'm crazy? It's you, our family people, who drove me to this." My mother grabbed him by the neck. It took my assistant and me great effort to separate them. After my assistant finally managed to calm her down and take her away, I revealed my true purpose for coming. "Tony, do you know why I've ignored you for the past year? No matter how much you've provoked me." He stared at me, stunned. "Hailey's dignity? What dignity does a woman who has betrayed me have in my eyes?" For the past year, though I didn't act, my battle with him had already begun. Tony's sly provocations were aimed at causing discord between Hailey and me, weakening our bond. He hoped to slowly win her over. His tactics were sound. Most homewreckers rise by feigning humility, acting considerate, and waiting for the perfect moment. But how could I let him succeed? I cruelly shattered his delusion. "I will divorce, but Hailey will never marry you. Do you know why? Before you can make Hailey fall in love with you, I've already branded you as the culprit who destroyed our marriage. When I'm gone, you'll bear the blame." Tony's face turned ashen. He clearly hadn't anticipated my move. He couldn't comprehend. 6 years ago, the incident with the male assistant had planted a landmine between Hailey and me. Now, the timing was right. I merely triggered it, making him the spark for our divorce. But I wonder, after my resolute departure, does Tony have what it takes to clean up this mess? "I should thank you for your cooperation, Tony." Tony could no longer remain calm. He pointed at me furiously, shouting, "You want a divorce? Just because of that phone call? I told you, Hailey and I are innocent." He was well aware of the consequences of being resented by Hailey. His face turned ashen as he trembled and asked, "Rocky, why are you doing this to me? Is it worth it to gamble your marriage on this?" this? I spoke coldly. Tony, my life has already been manipulated by your family once. That was at my birth, and I had no choice. But you want to pull the same tricks again? Absolutely impossible. Tony was aghast, as if seeing the real me for the first time. Does Hailey know how cold-blooded and calculating you are? He asked. I glanced at my watch and said, she will. But you, Tony, won't have the chance anymore. Earlier, Peter had messaged me, informing me that he had received Hailey's signed divorce agreement. But he didn't realize the joy in his words was almost spilling out of the screen. I could already imagine how things would unfold. Looking at Tony, who had collapsed onto the sofa in a daze, I brushed off some dust and stood up. Move out soon. This property is one I specifically insisted on keeping. Tony yelled angrily behind me. Rocky, what are you so smug about? If I can't have Hailey, you're getting divorced too. That means you've lost too. After all, I already had nothing to begin with. I ignored his impotent rage completely. Winning or losing is never determined by shouting. On the way back, my mother grumbled in the car, saying I was too soft and should have kicked him out immediately. I just smiled without explaining. Simply evicting him wouldn't have the same devastating impact as breaking his spirit piece by piece. In the divorce agreement, aside from asking for custody of Alice, Hailey left me all of the family's income over the years, including her early investments. Because of this, our divorce case was even more sensational than I had anticipated. Peter exaggerated. You've walked away with $60 billion. Think about how people mocked you 6 years ago when Hailey cheated on you. And now, 6 years later, you've made an epic comeback. He added gleefully. Now, not just the finance world, but the entertainment industry and social news circles are all buzzing about you. Even in the legal world, people are talking about the lawyer who handled your divorce. Thanks to you, I've become a nationally famous attorney. I neither agreed nor denied. After signing the papers and completing the formalities, I finally had a restful sleep. The next day, I casually opened my phone, only to find it flooded with news about me. Asterisk, a gentleman takes revenge not in 10 years, but 6. Asterisk, I skimmed the article. It was reasonably objective, neither praising nor criticizing me. It recounted the true and false stories of my and Hailey's 6 years together, all backed by verifiable reports. I stared at the bold headline. Asterisk, a gentleman takes revenge not in 10 years, but 6. Asterisk, what a light and yet heavy phrase. On the way to a shareholder meeting for one of my companies, I received a call from the editor-in-chief of a financial magazine. I pulled over to understand their request. Their magazine's Hall of Fame and Top 100 Wealth list were about to be published. Due to the massive financial shift from my divorce with Hailey, I had emerged as a dark horse on the list, despite being a newcomer in the finance world. To ensure accuracy, they wanted to conduct a brief interview with me. After the phone interview, I couldn't help but chuckle. Such a prestigious financial magazine, and yet being listed would inevitably bring a storm of rumors. Hailey, seasoned in the business world, had foreseen this long ago. Becoming an independent investor truly spared her a lot of trouble. The following days were a whirlwind of meetings, leaving me no time to reflect on the end of my 6-year marriage. Still, I made time daily to have meals with Alice. Hailey was always present. We parted ways amicably, without disputes. Hailey, as a mother, was now more attentive than before the divorce. Alice seemed unaffected. I didn't fight Hailey for custody of Alice. There was no need. With her mother, Alice would never lose her father. But with me, I couldn't guarantee that Hailey's love for Alice would remain consistent over the years. Moreover, with Hailey's connections, social circle, and resources, the education and opportunities Alice could receive would far surpass what I could provide. I needed Hailey to be involved in every moment and detail of Alice's life. The more invested she was, the less likely she would walk away. After dinner one evening, Hailey asked me to stay the night for Alice. I shook my head. She has to adapt eventually, and she's strong enough now to handle her parents being apart. Is that why you chose this year to file for divorce? Hailey asked, finally piecing things together. She stopped me from closing the car door. I paused in thought for a moment before looking at her. If that's what you think, sure. She froze slightly, as if seeing me in a new light. Then she nodded and stepped back. As I drove away, I rolled down the window. Hailey, are you regretting giving me so much? She smiled confidently. Rocky, this isn't the end for us. A vague and ambiguous statement. I shut the window with a cold face, leaving her in a cloud of exhaust fumes. It took me 2 months to sort everything out. Peter, under someone's request, insisted I attend this year's alumni reunion. Harvard University is a prestigious institution, and there are plenty of successful people like you. The organizers this time are senior alumni who, like you, made it onto the wealth rankings. I rubbed my sore temples. Seems like I can't skip this close one. This is your circle now. You can't just tag along behind Hailey like before. I sighed. All right, this would be my first public appearance since the divorce. It was a step I knew I had to take. Peter, however, hesitated and added, "By the way, there's been some negative talk about you. If you hear any of it, don't let it get to you." I raised an eyebrow, unsurprised. After Tony moved out of the waterfront villa with his daughter, my divorce became a hot topic on all major platforms. Riding on the buzz, Tony did several media interviews, exposing that I was Sam's illegitimate child. He flipped the narrative, accusing my mother of being the other woman. My mother was so enraged she smashed the TV. For 2 months, the controversy raged. Some people insulted me and my mother. Others supported me, calling me an inspiration. I never made any public clarifications. At my level, I've learned that if public opinion is entirely one-sided, it's actually a bad thing. The more people talk, truth mixed with lies, the easier it is for me to stay hidden in the shadows. When I said in arguments that I had moved on from it, I wasn't lying. Their family may have influenced me, but only just a little. Tony's antics would eventually reveal him as nothing more than a clown. Even though I prepared myself to hear criticism firsthand, I didn't expect some people to be so cruel with their words. Standing outside the Grand Hyatt Ballroom, where the Harvard alumni event was being held, I overheard Rocky, the illegitimate son who used his looks to trick Hailey, skipped 20 years of hard work and achieved financial freedom through divorce. What a schemer, turning marriage into a stepping stone. He's truly played the marriage law like a fiddle. The man speaking was an alumni senior, someone I recognized. Tony, after marrying a Serena family offshoot, had met him through Mrs. Serena. The two briefly dated before breaking up. He later married the heiress of a small company. In my 3rd year of marriage, at a media event, he tried to corner me in front of the cameras, implying that I was a freeloader without any real skills, and that Hailey would eventually abandon me. I saw through his trap and countered on the spot, leaving him embarrassed. He hadn't shown his face in front of me since. Yet, years later, he still bore a grudge. My assistant whispered beside me, "Rumor has it that Serena stayed single because she still has feelings for you. If it weren't for the need for an heir, she wouldn't have had a child." To this day, no one knows who the father is. When people praised your resilience and cunning back then, Mrs. Serena even publicly admitted she had misjudged you. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity, but I only chuckled. The idea of Serena still being hung up on me, true or not, it meant nothing to me. Just then, Peter's voice rang out from inside, fierce and unyielding. "Jack, stop spouting your jealous nonsense. You claim Rocky married Hailey to skip 20 years of work, but wasn't Serena a better choice at the time? Accusing him of scheming his marriage? Did he orchestrate Hailey's infidelity? Did he plan the car accident that nearly killed him? This past year, while Hailey propped up Tony, making Rocky a laughingstock, did he ever ask for that? You can't stand that he made it onto the wealth rankings post-divorce, but every penny was from his investments, built up one step at a time. For 6 years, he raised Alice alone while Hailey was an absentee parent, all while grinding to learn and earn. Everything he has now, he earned. And it's laughable you think someone as shrewd as Hailey, who scrutinizes every detail, could be played by him. Scattered applause followed. Another voice chimed in, "Jack, give it a rest. You couldn't take on Rocky 3 years ago, so don't bother now." Flustered and furious, Jack stormed out, only to run into me at the door. Startled to find I'd heard everything, he froze, then turned pale with rage. "So you've kissed up to Hailey all these years, only to get cheated on and divorced. Even with the hefty settlement, you're still just a loser." I smiled faintly and stepped aside. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Chen." You, failing to come up with a retort, he stormed off in a huff. The alumni event went smoothly despite this little scene. The senior alumni were influential and well-connected, and the gathering concluded with meaningful exchanges and shared resources. After the event, I went to the underground parking lot to get my car, only to run into Serena. Her car happened to be parked next to mine. I hesitated slightly. Long time no see. This was the first time we'd met one-on-one since my marriage. At public events, we'd always avoided each other, limiting our interactions to a few seconds of eye contact. Acquaintances should keep things simple, as the saying goes. She shut her half-open car door and walked toward me gracefully. Time hadn't left its mark on her face. She was still as confident and poised as ever. Her gaze lingered on my face briefly, then she smiled faintly. "Rocky, you've changed a lot." I nodded. "I owe it all to the gifts of time. There've been many rumors about you lately," she said. I was slightly surprised. "I didn't take you for someone interested in gossip." She leaned casually against her car hood, her long legs crossed slightly, and asked out of nowhere, "Are you satisfied with where you are now?" For someone I hadn't been in contact with for years. It felt oddly intimate for her to ask such a personal question. I thought for a moment, this is the best outcome I could have hoped for in my life. So yes, I'm satisfied. She looked at me thoughtfully, as if digesting my answer. Your growth surprises me and earns my admiration. But her tone shifted slightly. These 6 years must have been incredibly hard on you. I stared at her in silence. Her eyes held a faint sorrow, light as a cloud. Rocky, you really did fall for Hailey, didn't you? I froze, offering no reply. I've seen the photos and videos of you two at events. In every single frame, your eyes were on her, admiring, doting. Rocky, you were captivated by her charm. The outside world claimed that having Hailey bear your child was all part of your strategy, but I know you're not that kind of person. The car key in my hand pressed sharply into my palm, but my face remained calm and composed. You grew up feeling the pain of your parents' separation. I believe your child was meant to be the salvation of your marriage. But Hailey, she let you down. She didn't seem to mind my silence, simply nodded slightly and walked around me, crossing to the front of her car and getting in. A brief honk later, the spacious parking lot felt empty, leaving only me standing there. I watched her car disappear into the distance. It was as though a grain of sand had gotten into my eye, blurring my vision into a hazy distortion. Serena was never one for excessive words. She carried herself with grace and restraint. But today, I sensed her sincerity and care. Perhaps the rumors were true. She still held feelings for me. Or perhaps she had indeed loved me once. I stood there alone for a while, ready to turn away, when Mr. Serena was standing behind you earlier, and she heard everything Mr. Chan said about you. Startled, I turned to see her assistant, someone I used to get along with reasonably well. Please thank her for her understanding and support, I said, unwilling to elaborate further. But he seemed reluctant to let it drop, leaning in with a hint of urgency. Mr. Rocky, Miss Serena hasn't married yet. Do you think there's still a chance between you two? I paused for a moment, taken aback. Seeing his expectant gaze, I shook my head. No, I see. My apologies for being presumptuous, Mr. Rocky. He looked disappointed as he said goodbye. I have completely freed myself from the trivialities of family life, and now frequently appear in the public eye. Hailey, on the other hand, is the opposite. 6 months later, her attempts to reconcile became increasingly obvious. Using Alice as a bond, she tried to occupy all my private time. Whenever the media captured her, she always appeared as the image of a good mother. When photographers approached, she wore bright parent-child outfits, carefully shielding Alice's face, cooperating graciously with a radiant smile. She took Alice horseback riding, fishing, skiing, archery, golfing, or waited in luxury cars outside the school gates. The most outrageous was during summer vacation, when she even took Alice to Africa for hunting. As I anticipated, trying to give a child the best of everything is a bottomless pit. It's never enough. The real question was how much she was willing to give. During a talk show I appeared on, the host jokingly remarked that Hailey seemed more feminine now, like someone deeply in love. After all, if she didn't love you, why would she so generously let you take 60 billion? Finally, the host asked mischievously, would you ever give Hailey another chance? I looked into the camera and thought for a moment. Who knows what the future holds? For now, I'm just grateful that she's willing to be a good mother. To keep a horse running, you must feed it. For Alice's sake, I wasn't stingy with a few kind words. Hailey, perseverance brings reward. Keep it up. The host encouraged her through the screen. Even Alice was won over by Hailey, softly pleading on her behalf. On my way to a business banquet, a waiter approached me. Mr. Rocky, there's a woman and child outside claiming to be your family. Shall I invite them in? Those nearby exchanged knowing smiles. The waiter must have been new, unaware of who Hailey was, or he wouldn't have dared to actually ask me. In truth, this wasn't the first or second time Hailey had pulled such a stunt. With her status, if she wanted to enter any venue, there was no need to wait outside. Organizers would beg to invite her in. Suppressing my irritation, I set my wine glass down. Excuse me, I'll handle this. Outside, snow was falling. In the garden, Hailey and Alice were building a small snowman, playing merrily. Alice, I called out, already wearing a smile. Alice turned her head and ran toward me. Hailey followed behind, gently draping a coat over my shoulders to keep me warm. With Alice holding both our hands, skipping cheerfully, I complied and followed them home. Once Alice was asleep, I couldn't hold back any longer and called Hailey outside. Enough, Hailey. You're disrupting my life. I heard Serena would be attending pretending tonight," she said, slightly annoyed. "So what if she is? What if she isn't?" I replied impatiently. This side of Hailey was downright unreasonable. Suddenly, Hailey hugged me, her hand slipping under my shirt. Instinctively, I tried to push her away, but she raised her brows and gestured toward Alice's room. I lowered my voice angrily. "Let go." Instead of letting go, she clung to me tighter. "Rocky, is your heart made of iron? What will it take for you to forgive me? We're divorced, not runaway spouses." Her stubbornness was exasperating. After nearly a year of single life, I had found great peace. This was the life I had always dreamed of. I no longer had to please anyone, worry about where she spent her nights, or endure criticism or demands from her. Being in control of my own life. Who would want to return to an unbalanced marriage? "Am I really that unbearable to you?" Hailey asked, disappointed. I sneered. "Hailey, the real question is, who would want to escape something beautiful?" Her confidence wavered, and her voice softened. "If you love this life so much, I'll hand over all my assets to you and dedicate myself to being your full-time wife." "Enough," I interrupted. "Hailey, what right do you have to ask me to trust you again? No matter how well you behave now, I can't trust someone with your history, and not just once, but twice." Hailey was rendered speechless by my rebuke. Whenever the topic of reconciliation came up, we always ended up parting unhappily. It's not that I didn't see her sincerity and efforts, but that's as far as it went. Being cold to others is better than wronging myself. I thought I had made myself clear, but I underestimated Hailey's almost obsessive persistence about reconciliation. Beyond using Alice, she started employing new tactics. In business collaborations, as long as she wanted to, we would inevitably cross paths. Even Peter and my mother became her targets. Within a month, Peter became her advocate. "Don't reject this outright. I'm not siding with her, okay?" Peter, afraid I'd walk away, quickly grabbed my arm. He handed me a file, an investigation into that male assistant from back then. At his insistence, I reluctantly flipped through it. Finally, he looked at me with hopeful eyes. "Don't you have anything to say?" I lightly tapped my finger on the file cover, shaking my head calmly. He was stunned. Hailey was set up. That night, she wasn't drunk and reckless. She was drugged. She and that assistant didn't even sleep together. "Don't you believe it? The lab results are right here." I shook my head. "It's not that I don't believe it. It's just that it's been too long, Peter. I'm really enjoying my life now." Peter took a long time to process this before responding. "But isn't this a little unfair to Hailey?" I shook my head. Hailey was not a woman in need of pity. She probably got the message from Peter and stayed quiet for a while, until one day, my mother burst into my office, holding up her phone and laughing loudly. "Son, did you know? Our family has gone bankrupt. Ha ha ha." I looked at her, frowning. "What's going on?" She was gleeful like a child. "My wonderful daughter-in-law did it." I took her phone and saw the news. The R Group's last remaining small company had gone under, marking the family's complete exit from the market. The report ended with a notice. The R family mansion was about to be auctioned off due to unpaid debts. Bidders were welcome. "I've already asked my daughter-in-law to buy the mansion for me. I'm going to retire there." Ha ha ha. She kissed me joyfully on both cheeks before running off to find Hailey and Alice. I shook my head and smiled helplessly. That night, in the middle of my sleep, the doorbell rang suddenly. Cautiously, I asked who it was, only to discover that a drunken Hailey had shown up. The moment I opened the door, she collapsed into my arms, choking on her words. "Rocky, I was wrong. I deserve to die." I steadied her and urged her to explain. She mumbled, "Seeing who you've become now, I realize how amazing and strong you are. I can't believe I thought you needed your family to fulfill your life." I looked at her, a mix of emotions in my heart. She gave me a drunken, mischievous smile. I wanted to formally apologize, but I couldn't work up the nerve. So tonight, I downed half a liter of red wine. She hugged me tightly, sobbing, "But Rocky, please don't doubt my sincerity. Oh, and I have a secret to confess. The love letter in the safe. I left it there on purpose. I was bitter, thinking you only chose me because you couldn't have Serena. Even when I backed Tony, it was just an excuse to go to Serena's house, to provoke her and flaunt." She rambled on and on, before finally passing out in my arms. After that incident, it was as if she'd found a new purpose. She started shamelessly showing up at my place. When I turned her away, she brought Alice along. She even managed to stay over a few times. Occasionally, acquaintances in the industry would introduce me to women with impressive credentials, but I avoided them all. Not for any particular reason. I just wasn't interested. With Serena and Hailey as benchmarks, it was hard for anyone else to measure up. Love has never been a necessity in life. 3 years later, Hailey had completely shed her dignity, content to be my shadow. By then, the public had grown used to it. As for reconciliation, she no longer seemed to care. At times, when I grew irritated and threw her out, she would shout through the door, "Rocky, let me in. I just want to warm your bed. Nothing else, I promise." Her words were so absurdly suggestive, it was hard not to laugh. By the 6th year, we were still living our separate lives. Neither of us had anyone new in our lives. Of course, rumors persisted. Some accused me, as a public figure, of disrespecting marriage and using divorce as a means to financial freedom. I always dismissed such claims with a smile. The end. If you like Kitten's story, please follow and like it. Updated every morning at 9 a.m.